Mats was born with a rare muscle disease. As he gradually became more dependent on his wheelchair, his gaming time and screen time increased dramatically. Our deepest sorrow lay in the fact that he would never experience friendships, love, or to make a difference in other people's lives.
Over the course of my career, when talking to mainstream audiences, I've had to act as an unofficial ambassador for the world of games. Every now and then, a gaming story will come along that will capture the attention of a mainstream news outlet for more than 2 seconds, and they'll ask me what I think. I've had to defend games as a valid artistic medium, which of course they are. And I've also had the ever-constant conversation about games being super addictive and or violent. And don't get me wrong, I know that games are not perfect. The industry is going through a lot right now, from mass layoffs to generative AI rearing its ugly head everywhere. And do not get me started on the constant backlash that games featuring a woman or a person of colour seems to get. That is a different conversation entirely. Every now and then, though, a story will come along that melts all of that away and makes you focus on what really matters. That games ultimately can be used as a force for good and have a deep, profound effect on people's lives. This is one of the core themes of the story of The Remarkable Life of Ibelin, which comes to Netflix on the 25th of October. Directed by Benjamin Ree, it follows the life of Mats, who is from Norway and has Duchenne, a muscular dystrophic disease that renders him unable to move, eat, or speak. He sadly ends up passing away at the age of 25. His parents, Robert and Trude, had assumed that he passed without having much of a social life since he spent all of his time playing games. As it turns out, he was part of a World of Warcraft guild, where he had in fact had a very fulfilling life. He'd made friends, helped people with their problems, and he'd even fallen in love. He had done all of this as Mats, but also as Ibelin. It's an incredibly well-told story. Given the subject matter, it needs a masterful and sensitive eye who can bring the vision to life. And you don't really get that without a director that fully understands the weight of the story being told, and also somebody that understands their craft as a storyteller. When I sat down with Benjamin, he told me what drew him to telling the story initially.
I think when I approached Mats' family, I first learned that they had filmed his whole life.
Yes.
So that made it possible with the archival footage, family videos. And the second thing I learned that they had communicated in text form, and a lot of that was stored and published on forums. That's both the roleplay dialogue, but also character diaries, but also out-of-character forum posts.
Yes.
And then I thought that makes it possible to recreate an actual lived avatar life in retrospective, which hasn't been done before in the way we are doing it here, because we are trying to invite everyone in. And that was, to me, very compelling. And secondly, I think looking at that archive, and I'm talking about 42,000 pages, but that was reduced down to 4,000 pages. That archive, when I began reading that, I saw that it was a coming-of-age story there. And that coming-of-age story was very similar to the coming-of-age story that I experienced growing up. Mats wanted to experience love and friendship, and he made mistakes, and then he asked for forgiveness. You know, it's a classical coming-of-age story there. And then I was wondering, how is that like experience that inside a game? And that was super compelling to me. So the film, it does, and the story, it does have many layers, but when talking about the first, like what compelled me in the beginning, it was that coming of age story inside the game.
And the documentary certainly does have those compelling coming-of-age story beats. There's a particular moment that wouldn't feel out of place in a Richard Linklater movie.
It was a lot about like talking about, with also Lisette, about what they did back then, when they got contact back again. And it was eating ice cream. It was, she liked to push Ibelin out into the water. So it was trying to dig a bit deeper to what they were doing. For that scene specifically, I think it's the first time. I think it's also very emotional when they're in the water. It's also the first time they look directly into the camera.
Yeah.
And then we turn around. And I think the piano music from Uno also helps a lot with the emotionality. And right afterwards, Ibelin asks for forgiveness, So it's a very emotional scene. I think we kind of break the rules a bit there with looking directly into the camera, but I think that creates a moment there. Yeah. We feel like Rumer looks directly at us, and we feel Ibelin does the same, and that creates a very, very closeness to the scene.
The documentary makes use of fully voice-acted, animated World of Warcraft scenes. When I heard this and saw this for the first time, I was worried that it would become quite hammy and overdone very quickly. But there are a couple of reasons as to why this isn't the case. I think it is done quite sensitively. For starters, Benjamin went out of his way to ensure that the voice cast consisted entirely of actors with disabilities.
When we made this film, we often asked ourselves, but also Mats' family, what would Mats have done? Mm-hmm. And that was very important to us. And we know that there's a lot of fantastic actors out there that doesn't get a chance to get roles because of their disabilities. Mm-hmm. So it felt like a very natural choice. It wasn't a discussion either. It felt this would be something Mats would have wanted. We found Visible Agency here in the UK. We did a huge casting session with a lot of actors, and we found the best. And I think that the voices you hear in the film are the best for me. Personally, it's 10 out of 10. Yeah. I think they do an amazing job. And the voice of Ibelin is Ed Larkin. Mm-hmm. He has played the lead now in West End in a musical. He's the first disabled person who plays a lead in a Western musical in 350 years.
I think also why the animated scenes work so well for me is that at the helm of the documentary, you've got somebody who understands fundamentally that games are a storytelling tool, and he doesn't hold contempt for games as a medium.
In order to understand who Mats Ibelin Steen really was, we needed to stay inside that world for a long time. And we needed to take that seriously. And I think that what you see is that we use a lot of interviews, but we match cut those directly with the avatars. So you immediately know which person plays which character. Mm-hmm. That was very important to us, because that makes it much more understandable. In early drafts of the film, it was a bit confusing because it was way too many people and avatars, and we didn't know who played who. Yeah. But what we also found was that to both have classic interviews and then cut into the game, but with those interviews being emotional, it gave energy into that world, because they were talking about really profound experiences inside the game. But you can see it on their faces. They're extremely emotional about those experiences. Yeah. So having both was so important.
With such sensitive story matter, towing that line of telling the full spectrum of the story whilst remaining respectful to Mats' family is not an easy thing to do. I wanted to know about what that process looked like for Benjamin.
I think as a filmmaker, one of the most frustrating and fragile parts of making a film is that you become blind to the story you're making because you watch it so many times. So Ibelin, I thought about that story 16 hours every day for 4 years. Of course I can't see it with the feeling of seeing it for the first time. So what we do is that we do a lot of test screenings with this film, 30 test screenings, in order to hear what the left impression is. And that's what we're talking about here. You can show something that's all truthful and true, but the left impression is not nuanced, or the left impression is kind of not right. But it's everything you hear and what is said there is correct. But the subtext communicates something differently. So it's all about the left impression. So film is a huge reduction of life, and it's all about reducing it and keeping nuances. Yeah. You can't do an objective film, but you can try to keep complexity and nuances and work with the impression the audience, first-time watchers, are left with after watching the film. And that is, dramaturgy in documentaries, not only artistic choices, but there's also ethical choices, because there's real people that's going to live with that story for the rest of their lives. And we need to take that seriously.
When I spoke to Robert and Trude, they agreed that this collaborative feedback process was crucial to not only remaining respectful to them, but also ensuring a good final product.
I still remember the first versions we saw. They were not good. We had problems understanding what the real messages were, to keeping the thread throughout the story and so on and so forth.
Hear the voice of Mats that he created after
he disappeared
the
out of the story at times and so on and so forth. And I think it is an extremely difficult documentary to create, because it's probably against all the advices in the books you study when you become a film producer. It's too many stories inside of the story. It's too many layers. There are 4 or 5 different languages. It's animated and physical, analog world at the same time. Everything is there to make the audience totally confused. And this he has, I think, also worked together with us with over the last couple of years from the first version, in a way that you see it today as a product, which is, I think, good.
Ultimately, Ben is somebody that understands the full spectrum of the human experience. It's diverse, it's varied, and at times kind of messy. It's something that is explored in his previous work as well, The Painter and the Thief. With so much discontent happening online, in gaming and gaming adjacent spaces, it's easy to get bogged down in the negativity of it all. I know that I, for one, have been very guilty of that in the past. But then you get a story like this that cuts through all of that noise and reminds you of what's really important. If there's one thing to take away from this video, is that you can be a force for good. Even online, you can really touch people's lives in surprising ways. So go forth and spread some positivity. Okay, enough with all of this woo-woo stuff. I'm going to go back to being super cynical. I just want to say a massive thank you to Netflix for letting me watch the documentary early, and I want to say thank you to Ben, Robert and Trude for taking the time to speak to me.